Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. Thank you for joining us for this Get Business Exposure by hosting or speaking on podcasts and radio, which is part of the Vertical Response social media series. This is part 2. But before we get started, I would like to mention that we do have quite a few people on the line, and I have muted everyone except our presenter. If you have questions, please type them into the questions box on your screen. I would encourage you to ask questions as they come to you, because we do plan to answer as many questions as you have as long as we have time. You can also send us questions to VR4SmallBiz on Twitter. As long as you use the hashtag SMSVR, we can easily follow along. Okay, time to dive in. To cover this very important topic, we have brought in a social media expert, Anita Campbell. She is the editor-in-chief of Small Business Trends site and newsletter, and is also the host of Small Business Trends Radio. Her popular website, Small Business Trends, is regularly noted as a rich informational resource. In 2005 and again in 2008, the site won the Forbes Best of the Web. The site also has been highlighted or profiled in the Wall Street Journal, on MSNBC, Your Business Show, as Website of the Week, and twice in the New York Times. In November 2005, she became the host of her own radio show, Small Business Trends Radio, which broadcasts over the internet each week and is podcasted. The show features interviews of small business owners and also corporate executives with important information to convey to the small business market. Now, before I hand the controls over to Anita, I would like to remind you to send your questions into the question box GoToWebinar offers you, or send them to us on Twitter with the hashtag SMSVR. Okay, well, I think I've said enough, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome Anita.
Well, thank you very much, Jenna, and thank you, Vertical Response, for having me on this session today. And I want to thank everyone who has joined in. I'm going to go through a lot of material today, and I hope that you will ask questions throughout. There's no need to wait until the end. And Jenna, I'm going to ask you to just jump in and interrupt me if you have to, so that we can get to people's questions and make sure that I'm getting at the information that you actually want to hear.
Sounds perfect.
Okay, great. So here's the agenda in front of you. We're going to do a quick introduction outlining the differences between radio, internet radio, and podcasts, and then talk a little bit about the benefits of those to your business from a marketing and PR perspective, as well as public speaking and positioning yourself as an expert. Then we're going to talk about hosting your own podcast or radio show. So if you've ever thought about starting a podcast series or becoming an internet radio host or even a terrestrial radio host, we'll talk a little bit about some of the basics. And then we're going to spend some time on how you get benefit from becoming a guest who appears on other people's radio shows and who is interviewed. That's a great way to get marketing exposure as well. And then at the end, if we've got additional time, we're going to do additional questions at the end. Okay, so you have 3 major options when it comes to radio and podcasts. First, there's traditional radio, and I even throw in satellite radio in this bucket. And basically, it's broadcasting over the airwaves, and the sound then comes down to a radio where someone listens to it via a radio. Simple enough, right? Well, then you have kind of a newer entrant, a hybrid Internet radio. And basically on Internet radio, someone is broadcasting, but instead of over the airwaves, the broadcast is being sent through an IP connection over the Internet, and it comes down to the listener's computer, where you listen either with a headset or speakers from your computer. And oh, by the way, you can have radio, terrestrial radio, simulcast so that it comes over the computer as well as the airwaves, but there is a distinction between the two. And then finally, we have podcasts. So what is a podcast? Well, a podcast is really nothing more than an audio file, a digital audio file, usually in an MP3 format, that is on the web, and it is downloaded via an RSS file, and we'll talk a little bit later about what that is, to someone's iPod or MP3 device. And that's what a podcast strictly is. You can also listen to the audio file on the internet, really just like internet radio, but it is something that is supposed to be delivered directly to a mobile device such as an iPod or MP3 player. Now, what we have though today is we have all of these forms converging on the web. So you basically can have the ability to take any kind of a broadcast, turn it into that MP3 file, and have it appear on a website so that you can go to a website, either click a little player or click a link to download that file, and you can listen to it from a computer or from the handheld iPod or MP3 device that we talked about. So let me give you a real quick example. Your local radio station may be broadcasting over the airwaves, but they may also actually put the recording of certain shows on their website where you can go and access them, and then they may also be turned into a podcast, and you can subscribe and download that to your iPod or MP3. So you see these are all coming together.
Anita, I do have one question on that slide.
Yes.
And it was that if you do find podcasts that you like, is it okay to repost them on your own website without asking anyone?
Well, generally because it is a file that you are listening to, a lot of times the host of the podcast doesn't mind if you just take the file as is and put a link to it, because the reality is you're not really posting that audio file on your own site so much as you're just putting a link to it, and it's really being listened to from the original file where it appears on someone else's website. I don't know if that's making any sense, but
yeah.
As long as you don't try to re-record it, but you're simply linking to it, to me it's like linking to anything else. And of course you have to give credit for it, but I assume that someone listening to it will know where that podcast is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
And frankly, most podcast hosts and even radio stations and hosts would love it if you would link to their recordings. So they can.
I'm sure. Spread the word.
Exactly. Okay. So what are some of these benefits of doing radio and podcasts? Well, I think no matter what size of small business you're in, just about any business can benefit from either being a guest or hosting your own. First of all, it's just good PR and marketing because you're spreading the word and you're spreading it in a different format. You know, you want to appeal to as many people as possible in as many formats as they find interesting. And some people like to read, some people like to listen. And so you're able to reach out in a wide range of ways if you add podcasts or even just interviews on podcasts to your mix. Also, it can position you as an expert or a company executive as an expert in a certain area. You know, what I usually advise is develop a couple of topics that you can speak on or that a company executive can speak on, and then go out and approach podcast hosts to be on with that topic. And pretty soon you'll come to be seen as an expert in that particular subject. Also, if you're interested in doing some public speaking, and let's say you haven't done as much as you'd like so far, this is a great way to kind of ease into it. And the terrific thing about it is that your audio clips are available online. And so anybody who wants to see how good a guest you will be or how well you do at public speaking can go listen to that clip. And of course, that's great practice if you want to go national or you want to get into TV. I will also say that it helps your business be found online if, and this is a big if you take that audio recording and you either transcribe it or do really detailed show notes about it and put it up on a website as text. Because remember that Google still doesn't isn't able to actually index audio very well. There are some experimentation efforts going on, but as of right now, if you really want to get found in the search engines, you have to take that audio and you have to transcribe it. But this can be a nice complement to the audio that you do. And now here's the really good benefit of podcasts and radio, in my opinion. And that is that you actually can reach your audience at times and in places when they are receptive to your message. Because if you think about it, someone is taking that audio file and they're downloading it to a portable device like an iPod, and they're going to take it with them. Maybe they take it with them while they're commuting back and forth to work, or on long airplane flights, or while they're out running or working out or out in the garden, whatever it may be. But think about this. Now you're reaching someone beyond just the computer. It's not just when they're in front of their computer or, and they can read your message from your website or your email or whatever. They can actually take that message with them. But I would also say that this is smaller numbers than are going to read information on a website or in an email. And so you do have to keep that in mind. But I think the trade-off is that while the numbers on this graph here show that the number of people downloading podcasts is smaller than, say, the number of people using blogs, which is much, much higher than 11%, in fact, when people do download your audio, they're going to be more deeply engaged, and you're going to reach them at different times. And I think that's a tremendous benefit.
Definitely. We had a question about that, actually. Mm-hmm. And they were saying that they completely understand that they would love to reach the additional audience, especially if they can bring the podcast with them. But would it be bad practice for them to cover topics in the blog because they want people to understand everything that they put out there on their blog as well?
No. In fact, I think that is a great complement. The two should go hand in hand because, again, refer back to the previous slide where I talked about the search engine benefits, okay, of having content that is written on a website. You actually have to have it turned into text in order for it to get indexed. And on top of that, some people just want to read, so I would definitely do the two in conjunction, and I do that frequently. We'll have a show on a topic where maybe we've written about it earlier or we've had a guest article by the same author, and what we do is we use the audio show to delve into more depth than maybe we could get into in the written article and ask questions and maybe do it in a more conversational mode.
Okay. And then I actually have a couple more questions on this slide as well. One is, how do you capture who listens to your podcast? Is it easy to follow up with them, or is it like a blog where you can't always track who exactly is reading or listening?
It's much more like the latter. It is much more like a blog where you can't always track who is reading and listening. You could use the, and I do recommend using Feedburner for your RSS feed. That's a tool you can use to optimize the RSS feed that these audio files get placed in. And there is a way that someone can actually sign up to get email notifications of the RSS feed items when something new comes down. That's one way. The way I recommend doing it is actually have a newsletter. And in fact, we have a newsletter that is specific to our podcast show. And you put a sign-up box on the website that you use for the podcast show. And people will sign up when they want to be notified of upcoming shows or where they can, when the transcript is done for a particular show or whatever. And if you keep it interesting that way, people will definitely sign up.
Okay, sounds great.
All right. Okay, so you want to be a podcaster or a radio show host. Well, I've got some advice for you. First of all, start with your goals. What exactly are your goals that you're trying to achieve? you see, any kind of podcast or radio show should tie in very closely with your marketing plan. So think back to your marketing plan. What are your goals for the year or whatever time period? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to develop loyalty with your customers and therefore reach out to existing customers? If so, that might suggest you approach a podcast or a radio show in one way. Or let's say you're trying to attract new customers. That may suggest a different approach. There are ways to use podcasts that are more for training, for example. I give the example here of the golf coach who helps golfers improve their game and has a variety of podcasts that can be downloaded, and someone can go to the driving range with their iPod and be listening to the coaching and then practice. Companies use motivational messages for their sales forces. That's another internal use type of podcast. In my case, I use my podcast more to reach out to a broader audience, bring content to them, and so we focus on bringing in guests that we interview, and we want to highlight the guests. So it's really not so much about my business per se, but it's about creating an ongoing source of content. So these are just some examples on this slide of what you can do with a podcast. This is by no means exclusive. Tons and tons of ways you can use podcasts and radio. You want to decide on your format and length, and that means think about your target audience, and you know the old who, what, when, where, how, and why? Those are the questions you want to answer about your target audience. So if you're trying to reach out to prospective new customers and maybe also serve your existing customers, ask about each of those groups. Who exactly are you trying to reach? What are you trying to reach them with? What type of message or what type of content? When do you want to reach them? And that includes both frequency as well as maybe a certain day of the week or whatever. Where? I mean, if you are more interested in reaching them while they're in their car driving, that might suggest terrestrial radio. If you're more interested in reaching them in this sort of intimate, portable format, that would suggest podcasts, and so on. So ask all those questions, tie it back to your marketing plan. If you decide to do an interview series, just remember that it takes a lot more time to deal with guests than you might imagine. So really think about whether you can do that over the long haul. And maybe you compromise. Maybe what you do is provide a podcast series that is more internal people in your company speaking on topics, and then occasionally you bring in a guest. People have various ideas about what they think is a great length for a podcast. Some people think really, really short. There is actually a podcast that I know of out there that is a 60-second podcast. It's literally a very short tip. And other people want to go longer. They want to take a deep dive into a topic. It's really up to you as to what you're trying to achieve. I go for the 30-minute. Some people swear by 15 minutes. You might even want to experiment a little bit with length. And do remember that if you go with radio, in a 1-hour show, for example, 20 minutes of that might end up being commercials. So think about that as well. And just think about over the long haul, can you keep up a frequency? And if you don't have a podcast or a radio show that's frequent enough, you may not be able to develop an audience.
I've heard of people doing the weekly show. But I've also heard of them maybe doing like 3 or 4 at a time to produce content when they have time. Does that take away from the timeliness of the podcast?
No, actually, I think that's a very efficient way to do it. I mean, unless you're an industry association, for example, who's giving news updates and what you're dealing with is very time sensitive, I would say most podcasts tend to be much more evergreen content. So that would work very well. You could very well sit down and record a number of podcasts and then just issue them out, one a week over time.
Okay.
All right. So I have a little graphic here that shows you at a high level how to create a podcast. In case you're not really sure, this hopefully will help you conceptualize it. So the first step is that you have to record the audio, and maybe you're recording that on a computer using audio software, or in the case of radio, you're going to be recording into a mic to the radio station. And by the way, with internet radio, don't know whether you know this, but the vast majority of internet radio, in fact almost all of it, is recorded in the host's office, and it's recorded long distance and through a special connection that goes back to the internet radio station. And even a lot of terrestrial radio today is recorded this way. So it's not really a case of going into the studio, but it's all being done long distance. The next step is, once you have the recorded file, you're going to want to edit it a little bit, maybe clean up and take out any extraneous noise. I also recommend, if it is a show, that you have a professionally recorded music clip and a little voiceover that introduces the podcast at the beginning. It's called an intro, and then a little outro at the end to signal the end of the show. And then you save this as an MP3 file on the computer. And then you load that MP3 file online. So it has to go on the internet, and it will have a URL, usually with the extension .mp3 at the end. And that's how people will access it, because really that's going to be the best way to get it, is they're going to go to a web browser where it's going to be added to an RSS feed, and they're going to get it that way. So the easiest way to do this that I have found is to put your podcast on a blog. You do not have to put it on a blog. It can be put on a website. But the advantage of a blog is that a blog entry automatically creates an RSS feed entry. So when you write up a blog entry and you are going to enclose, which is basically you're just going to copy and paste this link with a little code for your MP3 file into your blog post, it's going to automatically add that to an RSS feed that people can subscribe to, and it sets that subscription to the RSS feed that is going to allow listeners to download it to their iPod or MP3 player, or they can just go on the website and get it that way.
Anita, we have several people asking if you have any recommendations for any hardware or software to record podcasts. Yeah,
this is something you can do literally at a very expensive level or a very inexpensive level. What I usually recommend to people to start is get a decent sounding USB headset and record on a computer. And you can get a USB headset, basically one that plugs in with a USB cord that has really good sound with a mic and ear pads for maybe $30 to $50. And Logitech does a really good one. There are several good brands out there. And then you can record it a variety of ways. And I've got a slide that actually talks about how to do that. Yeah, let me just jump to this particular slide here in front of you with a chart that explains some of the options. So the option that I'm really talking about here is like with a headset and mic and audio software, which is really good for solo podcasts, and that's the fourth item on this particular slide. Audacity is an inexpensive, actually it's free, open source recording software and also editing software for files, and I definitely recommend Audacity, and you can just go online and look that up, Audacity software. If you're doing interviews, you can connect in via Skype, and there is a software called Pamela, which is inexpensive, and it works very well with Skype, and you can record interviews via Skype. The other person on the interview does not need to actually be on Skype. You can dial out using the Skype out service so that you dial out to a regular telephone line as well. Both of those options can be very inexpensive, or you can invest in higher level microphones and all sorts of decoding equipment and so on. I would say that's well past the beginner stage for that. Now here's a really easy way to record a podcast, blogtalkradio.com. It is a do-it-yourself kind of one-stop shop for creating actually an internet radio show / podcast. And you can use this service. You sign up for an account. The basic service is free. And you simply connect in via a telephone line, and you can record your show, or you can have guests call in as well. You can even have callers call in with questions. And at the end of your show is automatically recorded for you, automatically put into an RSS feed as a podcast, and there's even like a little flash player that you can embed on your website and play your recorded show. So if you're looking for a really easy, really inexpensive option, do check out blogtalkradio.com. You can do a teleconference recording too, which is reasonably easy to do the recording. You call into a teleconferencing service that offers recorded recordings, and you can have a guest that you interview over a teleconference. Make sure you select the recording option at the end. You'll get access to the recording. You would, at that point, have to put it on a blog if you wanted to add it to an RSS feed and turn it into a podcast. You can have a digital recording device. So there are little handheld devices you can buy, like a little recorder, but instead of having tape in it, it's just digital. Sony makes a good one. And you can record off of that, and then you take the file out of the recorder, or through a cord you can download it to your computer, and then from there you manipulate the sound file. Then we go to the internet radio networks. There are a number of them out there: WS Radio, Voice America, Global Talk Radio, and typically you have to pay for airtime. But what they do is they set you up with a connection so that you can call in from your office and you can conduct a radio show, and they handle all the technical details for you. And then, of course, there's regular radio or satellite radio. It's a lot to take in, lots of different options, but if you're really looking for something that is just dirt simple and inexpensive, check out Blog Talk Radio. I really recommend it. That's what we use for our show now. Any questions about that?
Nope, I think I covered it.
Okay, great. I'm going to move on. So let's talk about some best practices. I mentioned doing an intro and an outro. You can get professional voice talent over the internet inexpensively, and you can music clips inexpensively. I caution you, do not use just any music that you have, because it is probably subject to copyright, and you do not want to infringe copyright or be hit with a bill later on from the owner of that music saying, you owe me royalties because you've been using this for 2 years in your radio show. There are a lot of places online where you can get royalty-free music clips that are designed specifically for podcasts and presentations and other things. And they can be anywhere from a few dollars, maybe $10 to $100, but there are a wide variety of those, and do definitely use that. I strongly urge preparing, and I say use a script. And what I mean is, don't read from a script, but if you write down your introduction, if you're interviewing a guest, you write down your guest's name and their title, and you have some questions that you want to make sure you ask, and then you write down the information that you're going to give to close the show. This way you don't forget anything, and the act of writing it down will actually be a nice practice session for you. And that way you're not sort of stumbling around trying to remember something, or gee, did I get this guest title right, or whatever it is. You have it all in front of you. We talked about this RSS feed. that you have to embed your MP3 file in if you want people to be able to download this podcast into an iPod or MP3 player. I strongly recommend using the Feedburner service for your RSS feed. And basically you just sign up at Feedburner, which is now a Google-owned service, for a free account. It's completely free. And they have what they call their SmartCast service. So you sign up in your control panel for SmartCast, and it will optimize this feed for iTunes and optimize it for holding or enclosing, if you will, an MP3 audio file. And there are various options that you can choose right in the Feedburner control panel for that. And all you do is, once you've created your audio file, and then you do a blog post, and you're going to actually enclose, which means just put in the blog post your MP3 file, you're going to want to take your feed from your blog and you just basically what they call burn a Feedburner feed, which simply means that they convert it to the Feedburner format. And then in Feedburner you choose this SmartCast option. You optimize this feed for iTunes and to hold the audio, and then that's the feed that you put out on your website and ask people to subscribe to, because it makes it much more user-friendly for the user or listener to use the Feedburner SmartCast feed. Make sure you list your podcast in podcast directories, including you want to make sure that you're going to be in iTunes, but you also want to make in the other ones out there, Podcast Alley, Podcast Pickle. There are a wide variety of them out there. You can simply start looking on the web for Podcast Directory. Again, add those transcripts and show notes so that the search engines can find all this good content. It also gives an alternate way for users to get your content. Some people are not going to listen no matter what you do. And what I have found from my own experience is that a relatively small percentage are actually going to listen to audio of your total overall blog readers or your newsletter subscribers. It might be as small as 10 to 15%. But you can repurpose that content by having transcripts done. We use an online service for the transcripts. It's reasonably inexpensive. It costs us, it can cost anywhere, maybe $20 for a relatively short podcast to be transcribed, and it's called castingwords.com. Go to castingwords.com. You handle it all online. You upload your MP3 file. You pay for it online, and when the transcript is ready, they send you an email and they provide it in various forms. And voila, you've got a transcribed podcast.
I love that.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. We use it. And they have a variety of options where you can get expedited service. Or if you don't care about it taking, maybe a week or more, you just go with the regular service. It's very inexpensive.
Cool.
Finally, above all, I want you to remember your target audience. Always remember in your podcast who your target audience is so that you don't get off track talking about things that they're not interested in or not likely to be interested in. Also, you want to make sure you connect with your target audience. So, it's good practice to speak me to you instead of saying to our listeners out there, as if you're talking to this broad amorphous group. Instead, talk to you. It's me to you. And it makes it much more intimate and really connects very well.
I've got a couple of questions on that slide. One was, is there a site to obtain these music clips, the intro and outro ones that you referred to earlier?
Are there places to obtain them? Yes. And actually, I don't have in front of me the URLs, but if you go to the web and just search for royalty-free music, you will find a wide variety of sites out there. And you can go on the sites and you can preview the clips, and you can buy even shorter or longer lengths. Generally speaking, you do not need more than about 10 seconds for a music clip because you don't want your intro to be too long, or same with your outro. You can use the same clip for the intro and the outro. And there are places where you can find professional voice talent as well. Just voice talent search in Google will help you find that.
Okay. One person asked, they said they do not have a blog. Is Feedburner still viable for them?
Well, if you have someone who knows how to create an RSS feed on your website, it can be done. Then you could still use Feedburner. If you're not sure how to go about creating an RSS feed and you do not have a blog, then I would strongly point you to one of the all-in-one services like blogtalkradio.com, because they will handle all of that for you. If you want something that maybe is a little more white label, you could try podomatic.com. Podomatic, podomatic.com, and they also will handle that part for you and create an RSS feed. But that's what I definitely would do.
Okay. And then one last one is someone asking if you would repeat the URL for the transcribing service.
Yes, definitely. It is Casting Words, all one. And casting is like in podcasting, CASTING, words, as in words.com, castingwords.com. That's a really neat little service. And by the way, when you get your transcripts back, you will probably have to do a little cleanup if you're kind of a perfectionist like we are. We get the transcripts and we actually clean them up a little bit because they're garbled words that maybe the transcriber didn't understand, but you know them. So just be prepared, but it certainly saves you a lot of time. It's not like somebody has to sit there and literally listen and transcribe it in your staff.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, let's keep moving here. And so how do you become a guest on someone else's podcast or radio show, and what do you have to do in order to be a great guest? Well, first thing is you want to find podcasts and radio shows. So I was talking about that blogtalkradio.com. You could certainly use it to do your own shows, but there are so many shows there. You can go to that site, search by keywords, and you'll find other hosts who already have shows. And then you could contact them. There's actually social networking aspects to Blog Talk Radio. You can friend people and have profiles and so on. So you can connect with the hosts through that. And actually the hosts actually get a little blog that's on the blogtalkradio.com site. So you could go and you could leave comments and connect with the host and see if you can work that into being invited onto one of their shows. Same with Podomatic, not so much of the social networking aspect, but it's a great place to find hosts who are doing shows that fit in your niche or your expertise. And so then you approach these hosts and see if you could become a guest on their show. Internet radio networks is another great place. I list three of them, three of the networks here. Also, do you know how to use the similar pages search in Google to find more? It's very simple. Just go to Google and call up WS Radio by plugging in WS Radio, and you'll come up with a page and you'll see the entry in Google for WS Radio. And then in the lower right underneath that entry, you'll see a little link that says Similar Pages. Well, if you click on that link, what it will bring you to is potentially other internet radio networks. And you can find others that you may not have otherwise found. And you can repeat that search again and again with those other networks, and that way you find as many internet radio networks as possible. Again, go to their sites, you do some searching, and you see who's doing shows that would appeal to your target audience, and then you can approach the host. And I guarantee you these hosts who do interview shows are always looking for guests. They are always looking for guests. And particularly if you spend the time to listen to their shows, and when you approach them you show that you know something about their shows and you're a fan of their shows, then they're going to be very flattered if you are sincere in that and you contact them after showing that in fact you are a fan. And of course you can check out podcast directories such as Podcast Alley and iTunes and find shows there. And we've done a listing of top 100 small business podcasts 2 years in a row over at my radio site, smbtrendwire.com. And if you go over there, scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a link that says top 100 podcasts or small biz podcasts. And just click on that and you'll see a bunch of podcasts that have interview formats on there. And you can contact the guests or the host that way.
I had someone ask, they said that everything you were giving was great tips about how to get on a show, but if they had already sent the host an email, would it be bugging them if they used some of your tips and sent a follow-up?
I think a follow-up is certainly in order. What typically happens, I know in our case, is we can just get buried, and if something gets buried in inquiry from a guest, particularly if it comes in through email, I tell you, once it gets buried, it's impossible for me to find it in my email inbox. So yes, I think a gentle, repeat request is certainly in order. Don't assume that that host was saying no to you. It could just be as simple as it's buried in a moment.
Perfect.
Okay. Sell your guest, particularly if the guest is an unknown. So what that means is, just point out the benefits of what this guest can talk about, that they're knowledgeable in this area or that area, and, that they're a good speaker and very interesting. So just sell it a little bit. Also, if you're promoting a book, one piece of advice, don't offer to speak about your book per se. You can talk about your book, but talk about the subject matter that's in the book and why listeners would be interested in that. That's what the host really wants to hear, because nobody wants to tune into a show or a podcast and hear a sales pitch for a book. But what they would love to hear, they would absolutely be thrilled to hear about, is all the great stuff that's in that book and what they can learn from it. And of course you get to put in a little soft pitch for the book. And if you've given them enough information, they're going to be dying to go out and buy that book. They'll be buying that book as soon as they're done listening. And if you offer to promote your appearance, if you have a newsletter, for example, and you say, we'll put it in our newsletter, we have a blog, we'll put it on our blog, that helps the host as well. So that's a nice addition that you can use to try to secure an appearance. Now, how do you become this exciting guest? Well, a couple of things. First of all, make sure you have 6 to 10 seed questions that you can give the host. The reason for this is you know your material best. So make sure that you put up these questions that's going to bring out the best in your material. Also, by doing those questions, it gives you something to practice with. And I say practice, 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 because this really sets the newbies apart from the pros. The pros practice very well, and they're very well prepared, and newbies sometimes are not. So the more you can practice answering those seed questions and trying to anticipate other questions the host will ask, the better. Have a couple sound bites. People love to quote sound bites. Make it a one-sentence bite that someone can quote. Please don't go the advertorial route, but make sure you're giving information. Remember what I said, nobody wants to listen to a sales pitch. And do practice enunciating your words and punch out your key points. I have 3 points I want to emphasize. Number 1, number 2, number 3. And it makes it a lot easier for people to take that in when they're listening to audio. And above all else, use a landline phone, because the way that most guests are going to connect into a radio show, even a terrestrial radio show these days, is you're going to connect in through a telephone line from your office. So that makes your telephone connection crucial. I mean, don't even think about trying to connect in with a mobile phone. It's got to be a landline phone to have a really crisp and reliable connection so that you don't get dropped mid-sentence. And then, as far as getting back, well, it should go without saying that you should never cancel or be late. But I also think if you can promote your appearance in advance, again, if you have a newsletter, promote it. Hey, we're going to be on, so-and-so's radio show, and we're going to be talking about this, and I think it will be some great information that you're going to love. Put out a press release, post it on Twitter, and so on. And then afterwards, again, that's another opportunity to, promote your appearance, but it's more than promoting your appearance. It's about making sure that the world knows about all this great content that you have delivered as a guest in this appearance. So really use that. And if you do a really good job with this and write the host a thank you email afterwards, and you have a nice crisp statement in there, chances are that host is going to be so impressed, they may ask if they could use that statement as a testimonial on their website. And voila, you now may appear on that host's website, on their home page or on their testimonials page with a nice link back to your website. So, it's a great way to continue that exposure. And really, that's what I have today, and I'm open for additional questions.
Yeah, that's great. We do have a couple left, and I just want to encourage the audience to continue to go ahead and type those questions into the GoToWebinar box that's provided. With our couple minutes left, we will try to get through as many as we can. So, first one, the customer is talking about, I understand that the podcasts are for a targeted audience, but do you have any suggestions for bringing some of that targeted audience into my primary content on my website after the podcast?
Well, you can always do this in each of your podcasts. You can have a statement at the end as part of your typical outro that says, please visit us at our website or our blog, and give the URL and say for additional tips and advice on this topic. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is when you do the blog post or some kind of an entry about your podcast, use that as opportunities to link back to other content that appears on your blog or your website. If you're writing content frequently, you probably have articles and tips already out there. You might have white papers and downloadable PDFs, even PowerPoint presentations that you've done on the same topic. Well, when you write about your podcast in your blog post and you say, here's our podcast on this topic, and in it so-and-so is talking about XYZ, you could put at the end, and for additional information, be sure to check out our white paper at, and you give the link to your white paper, or we've also done a PowerPoint presentation on this for some conference. You can check it out here. And that way you're drawing your audience into your other content that's elsewhere on your websites or blogs or wherever you have it.
Okay. Are there any negative aspects to using Blog Talk Radio? In addition to that, is it only available for U.S. customers?
Blog Talk Radio, you do have some trade-offs. I mean, one of them is, first of all, I hate the name. I absolutely hate the name. Another thing is it does fragment your audience a little bit in this sense that we do have people who subscribe to the podcast on Blog Talk Radio, for example, and listen there, but do not come over to our website or do not subscribe to our main feed. And our goal, of course, is we want to try to get people over to our site where they can see other content. And we also have a sponsor, so we want to show up the sponsor on that site. And it does tend to fragment things a little bit. But I think the trade-offs are such that we get a lot more benefit out of it than the negative things. And every once in a while the technology has some glitches, but I will tell you, I've been through 2 internet radio stations where I've paid for time, around $200 a show, each show, and we had technical glitches there too. It happens. So as far as international customers, I believe it's open to international customers. I'm not absolutely certain, but I believe it is. So
Okay.
I would definitely check it out.
Perfect. Talking about paying for services, is it custom or normal for you to pay a guest if you're the one asking for the guest?
Typically not, and we do not pay our guests, and the opposite is true as well. The guests do not pay us to appear. Now there are some pay-to-play shows out there, but I would say the vast majority of them are not pay-to-play. You do not have to pay to get asked as a guest. But I would say no, it's kind of an even trade-off. You're providing content on the show, but you're also getting a lot of visibility. So that's really your payback as opposed to getting paid, an appearance fee to be on a regular show.
Okay. Somebody is asking if you could repeat the link regarding the 100 top small business podcasts that you have.
Yes, it's a long link, so I'm going to just point you to our website, and it's actually in front of you. If you go to smallbusinessradio.org, not .com, but .org, that's another alternate URL for our site, smallbusinessradio.org, or smbtrendwire.com. Go to that. And then once you get there, I want you to scroll down to the very bottom of the page, down to the footer. In the lower left corner, you'll see an emblem there for, Small Biz Podcasts. If you click on that, it will take you to the page where we list these 100 podcasts. And we've done it 2 years in a row, so that link will take you to the most recent listing of them. And we try to give you some information about what each podcast is like and a link to go over to the podcast. And we try to point out to which ones have guests that they interview. So at least it gives you a starting point. Some of the podcasts come and go, so some of them may no longer be in existence. I mean, every once in a while someone just decides to stop, but I think you'll find a good list there. Okay.
Then it looks like we have about 1 more minute, so I'm going to pick this one last question that I think we'll end the webinar with. It is, how do you navigate hosts or guests that are potential competitors?
Well, everybody has their viewpoint on this. I take a broad viewpoint on this. I have people on my shows and who appear in my blog and even write for me who technically could be considered competitors. But I view it this way. The world's big enough for all of us, and if there's something good to share, that can be shared, and why not include them? No, that's not going to work for everybody. But I would say maybe you just decide maybe who are your key competitors that you just would never want to have on your show, and then maybe that's a short list of 5 or 6 companies, and you just decide that it's best that we just not try to have them on our show, or we would never approach them to be on their show. But there may be others that, maybe they don't compete directly, and so it might be a good fit. And who knows, it may be the start of some sort of a partnership, a co-marketing arrangement.
Sounds good. Well, I did actually also, when you were speaking, have somebody write in and said they are in Cape Town and just signed up for Blog Talk Radio, so it is available for people outside the United States.
Thank you so much for that. Great.
And before we end, I kind of wanted to let everybody know that we have recorded this webinar, and we will send the recorded version around in a follow-up on Monday with, of course, Anita's contact information, so you can access that. But besides that, I wanted to say thank you, Anita. This was an absolutely fantastic webinar, and we covered so much. I have so many notes to learn from, and it was just great.
Well, thank you so much, Jenna, and thank you, Vertical Response, and everyone who joined in today. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, have a wonderful Friday, everyone.